Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Amiga Diagnostics Trading Update Investor Presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll. I would now like to hand over to Colin King, CEO, and Kieran Harbinson, CFO of Amiga Diagnostics. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mark, and thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this trading update presentation. What I hope that we can show during this presentation is that we are in a strong position to perform both short and mid-term value for Omega and our shareholders. In terms of presenting, as Mark alluded to, it's myself, Colin, and Kieran is helping me today. In terms of the agenda, we'll give a core business overview, an H1 trading update, and then an update on the core business in terms of Visit-X CD4, a little bit about lateral flow manufacturing capacity. I know I've had a lot of questions around that area, COVID opportunities and food intolerance, and then a summary, and then we'll obviously take any questions that come our way. So in terms of the core business overview, what I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes giving an overview of Omega's core business in case any of the attendees are new to the story. Our CD4 product is used in the management of people living with HIV. It's the world's only instrument-free test. It's patent protected and received WHO pre-qualification, which enables NGOs to procure the test with the knowledge that it's met strict performance targets. The test has been specifically developed to deliver a WHO initiative to reduce the number of deaths amongst high-risk patients, and is the only CD4 test included in a Unit-Aid CHI initiative, which is in place to implement this WHO strategy. In addition, PEPFAR, a US government fund and the largest donor for HIV care, has publicly stated that for CD4 testing, they want an instrument-free solution, which illustrates the potential for this test. In terms of COVID, at the outbreak of the pandemic, we realised that diagnostics would play a key part in the global recovery, and that we had the skills and expertise to help this recovery, especially with lateral flow rapid tests. We decided that we wanted to cover both antigen, if you currently have COVID, and antibody tests if you have COVID, if you have had COVID, and also to cover lab, primary care, and self-testing scenarios. To date, we have all three bases covered for antibody testing, including being part of a UK government-backed consortium, and are currently working with our partners to introduce antigen testing by the end of this year, early next year. Thanks to our recent fundraise, we're also rapidly increasing our capacity to deal with the potential demand. This will allow us to take a flexible approach to our production to meet the demand as the disease progresses. Finally, with regards to our food intolerance testing, which is a more efficient way than the traditional food elimination process to identify the foods that are causing chronic problems such as IBS. This business is cash generative, delivering revenues in the last financial year of 9.2 million and an EBITDA of 3.9 million. For this business, we have an exciting opportunity in China, where we've developed a Chinese-specific food panel, and our partner has received approval for lab testing and is currently awaiting self-test approval. Overall, we have a strong position in the short term to realise significant value from our COVID strategy, but as important, we have a core business with a great potential to deliver significant value in the mid-term. I'll now hand over to Kieran.
Thanks, Colin, and good afternoon, everyone. So on slide 5, what this is highlighting is group revenue for the 6 months to 30 September 2020. It was down on prior period by 29%. coming in at a total of 3.16 million. I guess, as a majority of you probably know, right now the company's revenue is dominated from the revenues generated from our food intolerance segment. So if we look at that one, revenue at 2.53 million, this was down by 38% on the prior period. And in effect, this has all been an impact from the coronavirus pandemic, but it is less severe than we first anticipated. And certainly it is less severe than financial sensitivity models that we have run. I guess what's encouraging is, I mean, over the last 3 or 4 months, sales have been down in each of the months this year compared to the prior months by in the region of 35 to 40%. But if we have a look for the current month of October 2020, which is obviously outside of the first half, but for October 2020, we're expecting sales to actually be up by 20% as compared to October 2019. So we actually see this as the first early sign of recovery in the food business to hopefully get back to, and indeed even exceeding, prior levels. And what's also encouraging is it's not down to any one single geography, but we're seeing a revival in orders from distributors throughout Europe, Middle East, and indeed Latin America. We did have global health revenues of a total of around about £500,000, which did come from COVID activities. Just under half of that is related to the Melogic ELISA antibody test that Colin will talk about later. And there's also some development income from an unnamed source at this stage. So for the first half, we came in with an EBITDA loss of £1.3 million. That was right in line with management expectation, given the performance in the first half of the food intolerance business. And Colin will talk to you this afternoon about all the opportunities we have for a significantly improved second half. But at the end of the first half, we also had cash balances of £7 million, and that is enough to execute on the opportunities that, again, Colin will describe. So at this point, I will hand back to Colin.
Thanks, Kieran. In terms of sort of the core business update, in terms of Visitec CD4 advanced disease, I think we're making great progress there. As I said, this is part of a WHO initiative to really drive down the number of people dying of HIV. It's a key initiative for WHO. They appointed Unitaid and CHAI to implement this strategy. And obviously in April this year, we signed an agreement with Unitaid and CHAI. We are the only suppliers for CD4 tests under that agreement. And I think what's also helped in terms of getting that traction with that agreement is the WHO pre-qualification that we received in July this year, which really, without that, what you've got to go is, for every country, you've got to go through a process of getting approvals within those countries, running trials, etc. And what the WHO pre-qualification does is basically indicating that, as I said earlier, our test it meets strict criteria. The performance of the test is sound, and therefore allows countries to basically import the test without going through such a stringent regulatory process as we may have had to without it. It also allows for a number of the NGOs to procure. Their sort of rules are that they won't procure but without having WHO pre-qualification. So it was a very crucial milestone that we achieved in July this year. And again, maybe just reiterate in terms of the market potential. As I said, this is currently revenues are relatively low for this product. We do expect to sort of be around the sort of 2.5 million come the end of this financial year, as per the FinCap research note. We believe we're on track for that. But I think more importantly, you looking beyond this year and as those initiatives take place and bed in, basically Unitaid and CHAI were concerned around what capacity we had, and they were demanding that we could prove to them that we could produce up to 6 million tests per annum within the sort of 3 to 5 year framework. Clearly we can deliver that, as I'll demonstrate with the capacity graph shortly. And in terms of the selling price, it's $4 a test, and it's approximately 70% margin. So you can see a huge potential in the coming years ahead for CD4. And as I said, we're certainly on track for meeting market expectations in this financial year as well. Just to go into a little bit more detail around where those opportunities are coming from and where the sales will be driven from. As I touched on, I think the really important key milestone for us is that Advanced Disease Initiative that's driven by the World Health Organization. Unitaid and CHAI have started that implementation process. We currently have 6 countries who have placed purchase orders with us. Through this agreement, these 6 countries are, I think I mentioned before, are really designed to get the logistics and the way that the test will be deployed in country, in place and make sure that all those logistics are working. And then there'll be further countries roll on behind that. There is already demand coming from other countries for the test as well, and we expect further countries to come on board before the end of this financial year. The way this initiative is set up with CHAI and Unitaid is that they're really there to get the test implemented and get it implemented within the country. They put the test into the country free of charge, and then the aim is that basically to ensure long-term funding for the test in country. Then organisations such as PEPFAR and Unitaid will come in behind. PEPFAR and the Global Fund will come in behind CHAI and provide that long-term funding for the tests. And obviously for us, it's a huge benefit not having to deal with a lot of these low middle income countries where potentially there's obviously payment issues. There are not issues that we have to deal with because our relationship is with the likes of CHAI or PEPFAR or the Global Fund, and so there's no payment issues there, which is obviously great for us. And I think in terms of where we are, we've always been engaging with Global Fund and PEPFAR as well. PEPFAR, their financial year actually aligns nicely with ours, so it starts in April and then finishes in March. So we're expecting to see demand coming from PEPFAR during our next FY. They've started that planning process already, and we're already having encouraging meetings with them and the Global Fund. So overall, this initiative is starting, despite COVID and the issues within these low middle income countries, there is still a good momentum behind this initiative and getting it off the ground. In addition to this initiative, MSF, who were a long-term partner with us and key advocate for the test, they really were a key driver in convincing WHO that this initiative was important to drive down those number of people dying of HIV every year. That relationship is getting to the point where we're now expecting orders to come in the next few months, so certainly before the end of this calendar year. We expect those orders to come in and them starting to deploy the test in all the MSF field sites. And then finally, in terms of the other NGOs, really the UN agencies, now that we've received WHO pre-qualification, we've started having those discussions with those organisations and getting them to look to include them into their budgets for 2021 and beyond. And those discussions again have been very encouraging. And again, the good thing about the UN agencies is they tend to place large purchase orders and also their long-term contracts as well. So once you secure them, you do have a little bit of longer-term visibility of what that demand can look like. So overall, in terms of CD4, really encouraged with the way that we're progressing here. And I think this year is really going to be create a strong foundation to really build on for going into the next financial year and beyond. Moving on, in terms of again, I touched on this already. I've had a number of questions with regards to our lateral flow capacity. Answer them and Walbrook answer them quite regularly. I think maybe some of our messaging has maybe not been as clear, and when we talk about capacity for the Rapid Test Consortium versus overall capacity, that message can sometimes get a little bit confusing. So hopefully this slide will address those questions and give a bit more clarity to what we're talking about. So if I look at the sort of next October to January timeframe, what you can see here is that we're committed to producing 200,000, so currently 100,000 tests per week for the UK Rapid Test Consortium, and then during November going up to 200,000 tests per week, and then that continuing on that basis. I'll pause for a second because I think, again, so in terms of the rapid test, the UK Rapid Test Consortium, that 200,000 represents somewhere around about 25% of the overall weekly production by the 3 consortium members. What's in the agreement that we have as a consortium is that if the demand is greater than that weekly output, then as a consortium, we can then increase, as an individual consortium member, we can increase our capacity. Initially, it would be offered up by a third. So whatever that, so if the demand was to go up to 1 million, there'd be 200,000 additional demand. Then that would be split equally, a third each. If one of the consortium members couldn't take that up because of other commitments, then obviously that would then become available to the remaining 2 consortium members. So our baseline is 200,000 tests per week from about the middle of November going forward, but we can flex that capacity if the additional demand comes in, and also if we obviously have the spare capacity as well to take that additional demand. So in terms of that spare capacity or additional capacity, so currently we're as we come out of October, we're at approximately 200,000 tests per week. So we have 100,000 tests available, and that's available for CD4 and Mologic lateral flow antibody test. And then moving into November, we increase that capacity up to 300,000, again retaining that 100,000 per week capacity for those other products. And then as we move into December, we take delivery of in November we'll take delivery of the equipment that we have placed. That increases our capacity up to 500,000 tests per week. What I should have said in terms of November, as I look at that capacity, most of that capacity is already consumed with demand, whether it be for the Rapid Test Consortium, CD4 or Mologic antibody tests, which is really encouraging as we build and as we move forward. So then, as I say, in December we'll be up at 500,000 tests per week that we can produce, and then as we move into January, we believe that with some efficiency savings and the machines bedding down, that we can actually take the current equipment that we've procured, either that's already on site or being delivered, and we can get that capacity up to around about the 600,000 tests per week mark. So that's where we stand with investments that we've made already. Oops, sorry, I just jumped back. As we then look beyond that into sort of February, March and April, I touched on the presentation I did a few weeks back, that one of the things I was looking at was, can we increase our capacity beyond the 1 million tests per week that we had initially tried to target. So we've been doing a lot of work in this area in terms of our existing Alva site, which has gone through considerable reconfiguration work since lockdown, basically. That the site has been in permanent building work phase. I think we're just about closing phase four at the minute of works on the site. what we've identified is that we can actually, the one remaining part of our facility, we can actually reconfigure, and that would allow us to bring in additional equipment, which would allow us to increase our capacity even further. So we're currently working with architects, getting that layout correct in terms of how that will work. We'll commence that work within the next week or so to basically, reconfigure the site. So by Christmas, it will be in a position where we would be ready to take in new equipment. And we're looking at, and we're in discussions with equipment manufacturers in terms of what lead times they can offer, and what the best way forward is just now. The graph is indicating that that we will step our capacity up, and then obviously by the time we get to April, we'll be around about the 2 million mark, or we will reach 2 million. I think as you look beyond that, we could possibly get it up further as well to maybe 2.5 million through equipment efficiencies. But this is an outline of what we're looking at being able to achieve. In terms of that equipment that we're looking to purchase, we have the funds available, as Kieran alluded to earlier, in terms of the cash that was raised as part of the fundraise. So we have that funding available to procure that equipment. So we're just looking to finalise that in the next few weeks and get that in place. The reason that we're really looking at increasing the capacity further is really being driven by what we see as the market really moving towards lateral flow tests, predominantly just now antigen tests, and I'll touch on that later on the slide. But I think as we move forward and when vaccines become available, I think antibody testing will also become will also eat into a lot of that capacity as well. So we've been speaking with a lot of stakeholders in terms of what we feel the demand will be for lateral flow testing, and that's really why we've looked at that additional capacity. So it's something that we believe that will be consumed. It's not just something that we're building for the sake of building, basically. So hopefully that's explained where we are with capacity currently, where we will get to by the end of the year, and then as we move into the new year, how we're going to build up even more capacity to meet the demand that we believe is coming our way, basically. So if I now move on to the sort of COVID and antibody testing, I think we overall, obviously all the tests are now available. They've all been CE marked, which is great progress when you think going back to March, nobody had even heard of COVID, or obviously we'd heard of COVID, but those tests were not being in development. To be sitting here 6 months later, having 3 products that have been fully developed and CE marked is actually exceptional progress that's been made, and it's a real credit to both the staff that's involved here, but also with our partner companies as well, in terms of Logic and Abingdon as well. I think in terms of the ELISA antibody sales, clearly we had hoped that the traction would have been better than it has been. The sales have been lower than we anticipated. And I think really what's driven that is that the larger automator players really got into the market quicker than certainly I'd expected. And they obviously have large positions in these labs, and they've basically started to monopolize those labs, where we expected to see some sales. But I think also the market has moved towards lateral flow antibody tests as well, and I think that combination of the larger automated instruments and those lateral flow tests has really squeezed the ELISA test, which is sitting in the middle. What we're doing now is we're not sitting back on our laurels on this one. We are actually actively looking at utilising our in-house laboratory testing service. We hope to get that up and running quite soon, and we've already had discussions with a number of external parties which we can offer a service to provide that testing with. And really our thinking here is that whilst we might not be able to get the volume that we particularly had initially expected, what we will be able to do here is attract a far higher selling price. It's probably about a tenfold difference between the price that we sell and the price that a lab offering that service can demand. So clearly, in terms of if I look at the numbers that are in the market, that's really where we're looking to recover that shortfall, is through that in-house laboratory testing service. And as I mentioned, a lot of the demand has been driven because of lateral flow testing. And what we have obviously now is we have the two lateral flow tests available in the market that have just entered into the commercialization phase. So that gives us additional optimism, and hence increasing the capacity as well, that we believe that the lateral flow antibody testing will consume a reasonable amount of demand. So if I look at where we are with Mologic, the Visitect branded CE mark test that we just CE marked in September, where we currently are is we have started a registration process in a number of our key countries, and we've already seen some sales from UK-driven customers, and also some European-driven customers as well, who can obviously just take from the CE mark product we have. So during October, we've already seen some sales, and we've already have demand in November as well. These are initial orders, but we do expect those to increase in the coming months ahead. What we've also looked at is we've looked at the prevalence of where COVID is highly prevalent across the world, and we've compared that to our existing our existing distributor network, and where we identified gaps in our distribution network. What we have, and we did this a few months ago, was we engaged with some consultants in the area to go and target and find us some key distributors in those key markets. And that work has started to come through already, where we're identifying some very exciting distributors in some key countries to take our tests. And obviously that process is starting in terms of registering the tests, getting those tests approved, and then we'll start to see that demand coming through. One key country that we have identified is the US, and we are actually started to work on an FDA submission, and we expect to submit that in the coming weeks ahead for this test. And we're working with a consultant in the US in terms of finding the right opportunities there to take this test in. We've already had some quite exciting feedback from that market. In terms, just to be clear, in terms of positioning the US, we've got to go through an approval process. So you are looking at into the new year before we would see the demand coming for that. But we do see that as an exciting opportunity in addition to the markets that we already serve. Then moving on to the UK Rapid Test Consortium, clearly we've CE marked the test. The one probably big question that I get regularly is where are we with the MHRA approval? We have submitted it to the MHRA, and they're currently reviewing this. I'm expecting some feedback relatively soon from them. And obviously, as I've said before, it really depends on what that feedback is. It could be that they're happy and then we move forward. It may be that they want some additional information, which we would then have to find and provide them, and then that approval would come thereafter. So trying to predict timing just now is difficult, but it is certainly something that is being actively managed just now. And I'd hopefully see something soon around MHRA in terms of news. I think encouragingly, obviously we got that UK government contract. I think again in previous presentations, I obviously had indicated that I did expect that to have happened quicker than it did. I certainly misjudged how long that procurement process took in terms of completing that agreement. It's great. It's over the line now. We've got an initial order for 1 million tests. And as I said, in terms of the consortium, we're certainly ramping up our production. And from an Omegah's perspective, we're starting off 100,000 tests per week. and by the middle end of November, we'll be producing 200,000 tests per week, which we expect to be consumed either by the UK government, and if it's not by the UK government, as part of the agreement we have, we can actually sell this product to outside of the UK government, and that can be within the UK or external outside of the UK. Our partner is partner member within the consortium is doing some great work there, and again, there's a registration process that's needed for countries outside of the EU. That work is currently ongoing. I think what's encouraging is because it's been backed by the UK government, there is some quite excitement around the product, and I think some countries are taking because it is backed by the UK government, are taking a more positive approach towards the test. So again, I'm hopeful that we'll start to see demand coming from non-government sources. Certainly, towards the end of November, I would expect to see that demand coming through, which would start to consume what we're producing within the facility. So again, just in terms of antibody testing, we're now in a commercialization phase. ELISA, definitely disappointing in terms of the sales opportunities. We do have a strategy to try and rectify that by targeting higher value revenues through our lab testing. We're seeing significant opportunities for lateral flow testing, not just within the UK, but across the world, and we're actively exploring them just now, both in terms of the Visitech branded lateral flow antibody test and the UK rapid test as well. So again, just to really reiterate, that's why we're building that additional capacity, because we do see that demand will come. I touched on it, and finally, just a final point in terms of antibody testing. I think with the news of vaccines coming out into the market, hopefully in the new year, these vaccines, one thing they won't know is how long that immunity will last for, and in fact, whether or not, in terms of when you have a vaccine, and whether or not the vaccine actually work even immediately, because a number of patients it may not work for. This is where antibody testing will come in. So once you've had your vaccine, after a period of time, 7 or 14 days, you could see where you would have a antibody test, and then periodically throughout the cycle you would be getting tested to confirm whether or not that immunity is still there or not. So I think that's going to be a big play for antibody testing as we move forward. So I think that positions antibody testing. In terms of antigen testing, really where we see a huge demand is with lateral flow testing. I think in terms of what's come from the news, if you just take the UK government initially, clearly the UK government have mentioned lateral flow antigen testing quite significantly, as they see this as a key driver for getting back to normality. And because I think one of the things that the antigen test offers is that there's a lot of asymptomatic people walking about who are actually infecting people, not showing signs of symptoms, and obviously therefore not getting tested, or by the time they get tested, that infection rate has already spread. By getting large volumes of antigen tests, lateral flow antigen tests out into the public, and getting that testing done, you could see where you can actually identify those asymptomatic patients, get them isolated, and then get the pandemic under control again. But also, if you do test negative for it, then obviously it could offer you some freedom to go about your business, go to a football stadium or wherever. And it's not just the UK government, though. I think, again, if you look at the WHO and World Health Organization, they see lateral flow antigen testing as a key driver for managing our way through this pandemic as well. And that's been well publicized. So I think, it's not just the UK, you've got the World Health Organization, and you've got a number of other countries that are looking towards lateral flow antigen testing as a way to getting out of this pandemic, especially over these sort of winter months as we look ahead. So that's really why we've really looked at what we can do in terms of increasing our capacity, because we do believe that demand will come for antigen testing. The slide sort of highlights the sort of key features of what the benefits are there. In terms of where we are just now, obviously we have an MTA with Mologic. We identified this very early on, and we have that agreement in place with them. They're making excellent progress with their test. They've had taken part. Their prototype devices have been taking part in a number of evaluations. Not just in places like Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, but actually in some of the in Nottingham as well, in terms of drive-through centres, etc. So they really have started to get the test, the prototype devices out there to understand how the test is performing. They've been have shared some data with me, and it's very encouraging. I think they are getting very close to completing the development phase. I would expect that to be relatively soon. And then what they will then do is they will then look to obviously scale up their manufacturing and get it into an industrial form. The timelines that have kind of spoken to Mologic around in terms of when we should expect that transfer to start. The early indications are that end of November is a realistic start time. It could be slightly earlier, but I think end of November is a realistic start time frame for us to basically take their methods, bring them onto our site, and then basically complete 3 validation lots, confirm that what we're producing is of the same performance as to what Mologic can produce, and then we can build our technical file up just exactly as we did with the antibody test, and then that would allow us to CE mark. I did mention in an earlier presentation that I hope that this could well be a nice Christmas present for all of us. I still hold that hope that we could get it complete by Christmas. If it's not Christmas, it would certainly be early into the new year. That we'll have this test available and be able to start commercializing it. But my target is that by Christmas to try and get that transfer complete and be in a position where we could start commercializing it. So that's certainly my hope. And as I say, that's why we've really looked to drive up our capacity as well to meet that potential demand that is likely to come from antigen testing. So I think that covers COVID. Hopefully I've given you a good overview in terms of where we stand today, the opportunities both for antibody and antigen testing, and how we have that capacity available, and we're building it up every month. We're increasing that capacity, and we expect that demand to consume that capacity as well as we move forward. And then finally, in terms of food intolerance, I think Kieran gave a great summary of where we were. Clearly, the pandemic has had an impact on the business in the first half of the year. Encouraging signs that we're seeing a recovery in October, and I think, as Kieran mentioned, I think the fact that it's not just in one area, it's basically across most of the world that we're seeing that recovery. That gives us hope and certainly a strong expectation that our food business will recover. I think China, though, I've mentioned this multiple times, this is really where we see a huge potential to drive this business forward as we look beyond this FY and into the coming years ahead. Our partner has estimated, the potential demand for China alone within a few years is up to 1 million tests per annum. And again, just as a reminder, it's $15.50 a test at a 70% margin, so significant revenue potential to generate here. Our partner, has made great progress, and they've invested a lot of money in this, and not just in terms of getting the approvals, but getting a specific Chinese app which uses artificial intelligence to basically remove the need of a nutritionist and give the advice to the end user when they complete the test. So they have invested heavily. They're geared ready to start a commercial launch. The one thing that we're waiting for is the Chinese approval for self-test. And our partner had certainly hoped that we'd have received this already. It has taken longer, and the documents are submitted, and it is just going through that process. What they did feed back to me was that because of COVID, the number, and especially the number of submissions that are around COVID, and obviously the Chinese government have been prioritizing COVID, that other things are taking longer to come through, and that's probably a reason why. But why there's a delay. But we do expect that approval to come very soon, which will obviously then allow them to implement that marketing plan that they have in play. And they already have the tests that they've procured from us already to be able to hit the ground running. So again, really encouraging here in terms of our Chinese strategy and that huge opportunity that we have as we look beyond this financial year into FY 2021, 22 and beyond. So I think that kind of covers our core business, and maybe just to summarise it in terms of CD4. I think key for us in terms of CD4 was getting that agreement with Chai, which gives us the foundation to drive it forward, and along with the WHO pre-qualification, really puts us in a very strong position to start to see revenues and significant revenues coming for CD4 this year and going forward. In terms of COVID, I think we've got excellent opportunities where we've utilised that capacity, we've built the capacity up, and it's now a case of starting to generate revenues from that capacity that we've built up. We're starting to see demand coming for our antibody test, and obviously, as I've touched on already, I think the antigen test opportunity is also huge for us, and will have an impact in this financial year without a doubt. And then, as I say, we've already touched in terms of food intolerance. So I think overall, I expect a significant improvement in the second half performance, and that we really are well positioned for both short and mid-term growth. And hopefully, I've managed to, between myself and Kieran, been able to get that over in this presentation.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Kieran. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your question in the box below and press send. I think it's worth noting, with over 1,200 investors accepting today's meeting, that the company will not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself, and the company will review all questions submitted today, and we will publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. I'd also like to remind you that a copy of the presentation, of the recording, and the published Q&A along with the slides can be accessed via the Investor Meet Company dashboard. And finally, before I hand back to Colin and Kieran for the Q&A, I'd like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company. And immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. And we very much encourage you to let the company know how you feel. Colin and Kieran, obviously investors had the ability to pre-submit questions, as I'm sure all on the call would imagine. There were a few submitted, and I know what we've tried to do is put some context around the commonality within those questions. So we've got a few, we've got about 7 of them. So if I fire off with those, and then perhaps time permitting, we can go through the live Q&A. And I think you have touched on a lot of this within the presentation, but where you can, obviously, the greater transparency we can give investors, the better it is. So the first question we have is, why have contracts not been put out in an RNS before? They announced by the DOH.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I'll take that one. I think firstly, just to clarify the legal position, there is a contract between the UK government and Abingdon Health. And then separately, there is a back-to-back contract between Abingdon Health and Omega as part of the UK RTC. So in other words, there is no direct contractual relationship between Omega and the UK government. So it's important that we put out announcements around events that can have a direct and meaningful impact on Omega's business. So, for example, as soon as the government placed a firm order for 1 million tests on Abingdon, Omega announced that in an RNS at the beginning of this month, around about the 6th of October, I think it was. And then secondly, as soon as Abingdon and Omega entered into the back-to-back contract that I just referred to, this was also announced without any delay by Omega in an RNS on the 19th of October.
Thank you. Next question. Amiga is awaiting MHRA update for the RTC antibody test. Is Amiga also waiting approval with MHRA on the Visitech antibody test developed by MoLogic?
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'll pick this one up. Simple answer is no. There is no plan to seek MHRA approval for self-test use for the Visitech antibody test that was developed in conjunction with MoLogic. This is because approval for self-test of any test is only being sought when the UK government wants to procure tests. So even if we wanted to go down that route, unless the UK government wanted to procure the test, the MoLogic or Visitech antibody test, then we couldn't go down that route under the way it's currently structured. My understanding is that the only test that is going through MHRA self-test approval is the UK RTC test. There is no other test currently under approval with MHRA for self-test. And finally, I'd just like to add, in terms of, because we've tried to segment the markets between the two tests, and our intention was always with the Visitech product that this would be used in the professional market, and we would predominantly look to export this test. So that was always our strategy, and it always has been our strategy there. So we do not require any MHRA approvals for the Visitech antibody test.
Thank you. There have been some suggestions amongst investors that the vaccination program will require extensive antibody testing to monitor the effectiveness of the program. Is there an expectation that a mass UK vaccination program will require mass antibody testing?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's actually a great question. My belief is yes, that there will be a requirement for mass antibody testing if a vaccine becomes available. And I think, as I touched on earlier, it's likely that when people get vaccinated, they will need to be tested on multiple occasions to determine how long that antibody response for the vaccine lasts for. So it's certainly my expectation that this will occur.
Very kind, thank you. Do the RTC expect further government orders beyond the 75 million already confirmed in the public domain?
I'll take this one. So again, maybe just to clarify the point that Kieran raised, the government has so far only placed a purchase order for 1 million of the UK RTC antibody tests. The contract between the government and Abingdon allows for a potential supply of tests well beyond the 1 million test ordered so far, but the government has so far only placed an initial order on Abingdon. And obviously, when additional orders are placed on Abingdon, then that's where the back-to-back arrangement would come into play.
Thank you. Can you clarify whether profit from RTC tests are slightly more than 75p per test only, or whether in addition there is a profit share across the RTC?
Okay, thanks, Mark. I will pick that one up. So two parts to the response here, I guess. So to the extent that RTC tests are supplied to the government, then I guess I would say that the guidance which is currently available in the FinCap research is a good guide to the contribution that can be earned by Omega. However, to the extent that RTC tests are sold to third parties other than the government, then yes, this back-to-back contract that we have with Abingdon it allows for an additional profit share mechanism. So yes is the answer to the question. When the RTC test is sold to third parties, there will be an additional profit share mechanism, and that itself will be linked to the ultimate selling price per test achieved with that third party.
That's very kind. Now we've got two final pre-submitted questions, I guess, ahead of some of these that have come in through the live event. The first of that is the experience of COVID likely to result in Amiga PLC redirecting the business towards more in keeping with its focus as it was in 2018, 2019?
Yeah, I'll take this question. It's Colin here. I think we indicated during the fundraise that with the build-up of the lateral flow capacity for COVID, that in a post-COVID world, we would look to bring tests to the market in the global health space that are complementary to CD4. So, for example, TB was one that we've raised, that we are actively looking at starting to develop. And the idea there is obviously by building up that experience, that portfolio in the global health, where we already have a strong presence with NGOs with CD4, that we could obviously utilise that lateral flow capacity that we're building in that post-COVID world. So a little bit back towards there, but not fully, I would say.
Thank you. And finally, and I know there's been a number of questions that have come through on the Q&A chat about capital raisings and raising money. And the final question is, are you planning to raise money through a placing to increase production?
And the short answer to that is no, we are not planning to raise any additional funds. Certainly not to attain the production levels that you've heard about from Colin this afternoon. So the fundraising we completed back in June of this year, which people may remember was predominantly undertaken to ensure that we could increase production capacity significantly. And that does still include increasing production to the levels indicated in the capacity chart that Colin presented this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Well, I know we've got about 10 minutes until really the end, and I know that investor feedback is very important to you. Obviously, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people on this call, so and I'm sure there's a lot of commonality within the questions. Perhaps I could ask you just to take a look at the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen, Colin and Kieran, and if we could perhaps deal with a number of questions, and just to really reassure investors that no question that has been submitted today will not be presented to the company. They'll have the ability to review, as they did last time, the questions that were submitted. So if I may hand over to you guys, and I will come in a little bit later to redirect investors and ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mark. Just trying to work the technology here, so apologies, just give me a second. I think there's a good question from Michael J. Unfortunately, my screen keeps jumping about. So the FinCup report mentions a facility in Dundee. Is this still being pursued? Why are we not more aggressively adding capacity? I think in terms of, hopefully I've maybe addressed that in terms of the aggressive approach we're taking with capacity. Obviously, when we were raising funds in June, one of the ideas we had was to get to the million was to look at a facility in Dundee that was potentially available. The more that I looked at this, and in terms of the management that would be required, in terms of putting that facility up and running, in terms of quality systems, operational management, and quality management, and then getting all that recruitment in place, it was going to be not impossible, but within the timeframes, it was going to be more difficult. That's why I then looked at the existing site we had and started to really think about, can we utilise the space that we have here to be more efficient and actually get more equipment in to the existing facility. So that's, as I say, and that's really what's driven a lot of my thinking, is that we can actually achieve what we wanted to do with going to that Dundee facility within our own Alva facility, we can get that equipment in, we can get it ramped up. Then obviously in terms of that overall management structure, I don't need to employ, additional operations managers, QA managers. I have that infrastructure here. So it's a lot more, one, cost effective, but actually just from a practical point of view, it is actually more efficient as well. And really what we're then looking to do is really just ramp the headcount up at a more, at a sort of scientist and sort of semi-skilled level within the site, which is without question an achievable prospect. And so hopefully I've answered that question. I think a lot of the questions I've maybe already answered in terms of MHRA. I think Stuart T, can you be completely clear about ELISA tests? Are you going to expand this as previously announced or switch to lateral flow? Again, great question, Stuart. I think what you could probably tell from the presentation that we've given is that there's probably without question a greater emphasis on lateral flow testing. I think we had initially thought around in terms of antigen ELISA testing. When we looked at that in terms of getting a lot of market feedback, it was clear from the market feedback we were getting was that really what the market was demanding was a rapid antigen test. And whilst we would be able to develop and implement an ELISA test, I think the demand may not well be there, because I think there's other technologies that are coming in that are pretty well suited for the labs. There's a lot of point of care equipment-based antigen testing that's coming in. So I think that's probably quite well served, and we would probably end up being squeezed like we've seen with the ELISA antibody test. So it's really that's why we're really now just focusing really quite strongly on driving that the lateral flow capacity up to meet what we see as very large demand coming from both antibody and antigen lateral flow testing.
Do take the time, Colin. There's obviously, I can see the number of questions that are coming in. Just select those where we can, and
yeah, I'm just trying to see questions that are maybe that I don't think I've already addressed through the question.
Sure, take your time.
Don't know if you're seeing it again. Yeah, I think we've really addressed a lot of these questions already, if I'm honest.
Yeah, a number of them have been addressed.
As it did highlight to investors, there is a lot of commonality within these questions, and of course, everything will be published on our website after. So, do feel free just to take a few moments just to review any more, and then, as I say, if not, what we can do is redirect investors to feedback, and then, of course, like you did last time, we can review questions and then put a publication out to the investors on the call.
Yeah, I think in terms of the thanks for the stalling tactic there, Mark.
That's the best I can do.
Get down that list and get used to this technology. I think for those that listened to the previous one where I mentioned my daughter helping me with Twitter, I think she might have to help me with the Q&A polls as well. Andrew H asks, when do you anticipate generating revenue for the CD4 test? I think, Andrew, we obviously have generated some revenues in the first half of this year, but very small. I think in terms of, if you look at the FinCap research note, in terms of what we're predicting for revenues for this year, we're confident that we will deliver those revenues. As I said during the presentation, we have already received orders for the advanced disease test from 6 countries. And that's currently working our way through our production process, and we will start to supply them in November and December. And as I said, we do expect additional countries to come on board in sort of January, February, March timeframe through that CHI initiative, and also the MSF looking to procure as well. I think Dylan G, CD4, Visitech HIV, what is the anticipated cost and earnings per test? I think I probably covered that, but it probably is worth just reiterating. So, and do you want to take this one actually, Kieran? The Visitech, what's the anticipated cost and earnings per test?
Yeah, so I mean, Colin's already mentioned that the selling price per test is around about the $4 mark, and that we earn a margin of around about 70%. So broadly, what that means is that the cost of goods is at or just above around about £1 a test. And one of the things that we had identified at the time we did the fundraise was a project to reduce the cost of goods for Visitech CD4, which is basically sourcing alternative raw materials in effect. That would then, these additional raw materials or alternatives would need to be validated, and if successful, we expect that the cost of goods could be reduced by around about 50%, i.e. taking the cost of goods down to just over 50p per test.
Colin, just on the basis of, obviously I monitor the attendee numbers, and people may have allocated time for the meeting. We're just going over the hour mark. I just wondered if there were maybe a couple of final questions, and then if I could ask you to wrap up and genuinely ask investors to provide feedback as they've taken the time to attend today's meeting.
Yes. Again, maybe just stick on the CD4 stream. Question from Richard S. As part of the marketing to Malawi, have Omega held any discussions with the Scottish Government, who are currently reviewing their overseas aid policy, but have multiple linked to NGOs in Malawi? To answer that, we haven't had any direct conversation with the Scottish Government, and it's certainly, I do have a number of contacts in the Scottish Government, so thanks for raising that. I'd certainly pick that up with them. In terms of Malawi, it is actually a key country that is part of the CHAI arrangement, and is also a key country for MSF. So it's something that a country that we're actually very active in. But I think it's certainly, if there are additional help there that we can get from the Scottish Government, then we'll pick that up. So thanks for raising that, Richard. That was a good question, or good observation. Again, I think as I'm looking down, I think we've probably answered a lot of these questions already, Mark, in terms of through the presentation.
Well, let's do this then, Colin. Let's if I could finally just ask you perhaps just a few final words to wrap up, and then I will automatically redirect investors to provide you with feedback. And as I said before, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, I mean, I think really the point of this was obviously to try and give everybody a feel for, in terms of where we currently stand. I know that there's probably some disappointment around in terms of perhaps expecting larger movement in contracts, etc., than where we currently are. What I would say is that hopefully this presentation has really re-emphasised the fact that we are in a very strong position to deliver both short-term and mid-term value. I think the COVID opportunities are in front of us. We will start to see revenues. We will have a significant improved H2, and obviously then looking beyond this financial year, looking forward, I think the prospects, not just in terms of COVID, but with our core business as well, are exceptional in terms of growth opportunities for the company. So hopefully we've managed to get those points over during this.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much to both Colin and Kieran for certainly updating investors around your trading update today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you access this meeting via our website, the feedback page will appear automatically. If you access this from the link sent to you by email, you'll have to wait a few seconds and you'll be asked to log in to submit your feedback. On behalf of the management team of Amiga Diagnostics PLC, we would like to thank you very much for attending today's presentation and indeed your questions throughout. That now concludes today's session. Good evening to you all.